This has been Rossow with ProFixer. I'm sure you guys may be familiar with us. So again, we're glad you guys have joined us today. We got a couple of things for you. Some of you may have to microsolding repairs. Some of you may be interested in microsolding repairs. Our goal here today is to get you over that cusp of interest and into that realm of doing and accomplishing these successfully with confidence. So we want to give you the technique, the tools, and understanding to accomplish that. I will be here to make sure you get the proper tools to back up Ben on the understanding. He'll be here to give you the specifics on the techniques. If you have further questions, we'll take questions at the end. And if you still find yourself not confident, Ben can pitch you on his courses for how he will better build upon that confidence for you. Speak with me afterwards. I will help you start an Gadget account if you don't already have one, and it will help you build you guys the toolkits you need and the consumables that will help you prepare these devices and boards. So without further ado, this has been Rossow with ProFixer, and we appreciate you guys.
Hey, how's everyone doing? Awesome. So awesome. So who here does HDMI already? Nice, okay, cool. Who here does not? So here would like to, but does not currently do HDMI. Okay, cool. So that's awesome. So one of the cool things about HDMI is it's an incredibly simple repair, and that's what we're gonna do today. I have 3 different boards. I plan to do like a really broken down process on one of them, and then I plan to do just the regular repair on the next, and then we can take any questions on the third if we need to, as far as like any specifics and things like that. Way we can see like a broken down process, and then like then the actual repair process, so you can kind of grasp the amount of time that it actually takes for HDMI. Do we have like an hour here?
At least.
Okay, cool. So so for those of you that don't offer microsoldering, I guess what is the big hurdle for y'all as far as that goes?
Squeeze in and speak up.
Okay.
If you guys can squeeze in as much as you can, just squeeze in tightly. There's some room. You guys can come stand behind these guys. I'm sorry for the location and sound acoustics.
Does anyone have any particular hurdle that they're, I guess any kind of reason why they're not? Yeah. Oh no, okay, there you go. Yeah. Okay, cool. I got a process for that. So wicking out the feed is kind of the hard one. Does anyone else run into any issues as far as like anyone that offers the repair? Is there any particular step of the repair where you run into an issue with that? Is it a switch on the back?
So I have a question. So at point, just to understand like what temperatures I need to start with. So if like I'm not coming in at anything, so just understand like the tools you're working with. So there's a hot air station right here in front of us. So you're going to be working with different like ranges of temps and different ranges of airflow. So if, like my question is what airflow we're going to start off with and what temper we're going to be working at.
Yeah. So the cool thing about so there's like 2 different types of boards that you'll work with. There's going to be iPhones, and then of course there's going to be like consoles where like Nintendo Switches fall into that same realm as well. But the really cool thing with these is the boards are incredibly huge, so they require a ton of heat. But the cool thing about it is whenever it consumes a lot of heat like that and it can handle it, like you can totally crank up the heat and have a little more like loose settings as far as that goes. You don't have to be that specific with it, which is nice because there's not a lot of worry about accidentally breaking it. But one of the really cool things with it is the reasons why you're not going to run into the issues with these like you would an iPhone with overheating is iPhones, they have a whole bunch of what's called underfill on the board, whereas these don't. So as you heat the board up, there's nothing that's going to interfere with the melting process of the solder and cause any issues down the road. So you can literally heat this thing, and even to the point where before I've even charred the edge of the board a little bit by getting it so hot, just learn in the learning process, and everything still ends up being just fine, where the board's blazing hot, but nothing ever really happens. But the temperatures that we want to start with generally with your hot air station is right around 400, and then we want to do max air on it with no nozzle. So you can take the nozzle off of it, and this will just get a really broad heat on it. And the way that we use it is we want to use it underneath the actual board itself. A really cool thing with it is, I call it like the skillet effect. And so, if you're heating up from the bottom, it just heats up the whole board itself, and you're then able just to lift off your port, drop the new one on after we prepare it, and then it just solders itself back on, kind of like a skillet in a frying pan kind of thing. Does that make sense as far as that concept goes? Just heating it from the bottom, everything melts, and you just lift it off, and it goes from there. So cool. Does anyone have any questions so far? Anything that kind of comes to mind as far as anything you want to ask before we go into it?
Can you do it from the top, or would that be more?
You could probably do it from the top, but I probably would not.
Change it to it?
I did not.
We talked a little bit about the process system, right?
Uh-huh.
One of the areas where I'm not so sure about, and I'm new to the concept of microsoldering, meaning that I never knew what it was until today.
Yep.
So how are you diagnosing the issues and making sure that you're figuring out or solving the right problem?
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So we do have a breakdown sheet of all of these. Sometimes, I would say most of the time, your issues are going to be pretty clear as far as physical damage. However, one of the things with physical damage is all these consoles, they have regular hard drives inside of them. So if they are physically damaged, it could damage the hard drive as well. So always what we do with any device or any console that comes in, if it looks like it's physical damage on the HDMI, it's probably needing new HDMI at least. But we do a hard drive scan on the hard drive before performing the actual repair. The cool thing with them is, especially PS4s, you can pop off the side covers and they're like user accessible. So you can plug them into your computer, use Crystal Disk, run a scan on it, and then you'll get the results back pretty quickly before you start the repair. That way you don't do the repair, end up needing a hard drive as well down the road, or run into some other kind of issue. But there's like most of them are very clear physical damage. In the event that it's like not clear physical damage, you can generally tell off the backstory. So if you ask the customer, kind of what was going on, if they have no history of the device ever being moved, it could be from like the encoder failing, which the encoder is this one right here. And the encoder can be swapped out, but it basically just processes the video. They can go out like in a power surge or cockroaches or things like that. They can definitely blow those out. But that's kind of our process there. Physical damage, test the hard drive. If it's not physically damaged, we still test the hard drive, and then we would take the diode mode values of the port itself, which we have all those like in our program with the breakdowns on them. So.
Are you sourcing basically just the same based off of what you see inside of the device?
Yeah. So these are exact ports that would come off the device. Yeah.
Okay. And then secondly, I'm wondering, do you have a method for, I guess, I talked to the gentleman here a little bit about reliability. Right. Usually, he said that you work on devices that aren't operational to begin with.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess is that primarily the market for microsoldering? Is it mostly for devices that aren't up and running, or you just have like an error that's unfixable software-wise?
Yeah. So you could run into something where it's kind of not worth your time to fix, or it could just be such a needle in a haystack, it's very difficult to diagnose. But yeah, most of the time, like most of the devices that you get coming to you are going to have very clear issues. They're going to have, it either won't show video or it'll show just, colors on the screen, or, some other type of issue where it's kind of rendered useless anyways. And as long as you're careful with the repair process, you probably won't break it yourself. It's probably, it could be a further issue like with the encoder or something else on the board that's causing the issue that maybe you weren't able to pinpoint. But they're very safe repairs to do. So as far as the liability aspect, I would say that would be very rare to like worry about accidentally damaging it. Like whereas an iPhones are much more sensitive, and very well if it doesn't work after you worked on it. If it was like a straightforward repair, it may have been you that caused it. But with consoles, I would say it's pretty straightforward that it's pretty cut and dry as far as that goes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of times we can shoot ourselves in the foot by like, sometimes the, like customer brings it in not working, but they're like, oh, it was working before it got damaged, and we take it in as if it's like, oh, it's supposed to be working, and then after we work on it, it still doesn't work, and we're like, oh, I must have damaged it even more, and then we tell the customer that, and the customer's like, oh, so you broke it even more? It's like, I don't think so, and you like tie yourself into like this weird convoluted mess, when in reality it never worked in the first place. And yeah, so yeah, sometimes we can accidentally pinpoint it against us if we're not careful when we had no liability in the first place. So.
Do you Kapton tape at all on this when you're doing boards?
No, I don't use any Kapton tape on them, no.
Even on iPhones? Just...
Yeah, on iPhones, we don't use any Kapton tape, and very rarely any kind of heat sinks or anything.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that we find with like using heat sinks, I only use heat sinks like working in backlight areas or things that are very close to the CPU, where you're going to get in there really fast with the heat and then be right back out. But in regular situations, what happens with heat sinks is they add more thermal mass, so you have to heat the board for longer to heat that heat sink up because it's wicking away your heat away from where you want it to melt. And then pretty soon, instead of that isolated area melting, you have your whole board that's way too high of a temperature everywhere because you put a heat sink on it. So it's almost better to not use heat sinks in most situations. And then Kapton tape as well can sometimes curl around the edges. So if you like Kapton tape the bottom of this thing, where there's the
It's also for passengers that maybe think about it.
yeah, this little guy right there. Sometimes you can put Kapton tape on there, but what will happen is it kind of like the interference I was talking about earlier, where it'll slightly move or shrink, and then it'll lift your components off the board. Whereas surface tension would have held them on if we wouldn't have had tape on it in the first place.
We didn't touch it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. We kind of cause more damage by trying to make it not damage, you know. But yeah. No, those are good questions. Does anyone have any questions or need any clarity on any of that so far?
Let's remove it.
Cool. So the process on removing it, well, so yeah, we can do that. We'll do that. So we'll say these tweezers right here.
See your plunger?
Yes. It won't fit in there because it's a 30 millimeter with a 10 millimeter plunger. So it's fine. But we can still push it in the back and it'll fine. Yeah. So I'm gonna hand that over to you and you can. So this right here is flux. So does anybody know what exactly flux does? Like, why is it important in the repair process itself? It does.
It's a good simple answer.
Yeah. So that is how it works. One of the cool ways on why it works that way is it hides everything from oxygen, because oxygen will actually react with the alloys, causing oxidation, and it will actually hide the molecular level attraction of your alloys, and they won't be able to mix properly. And that's where you get like that muddy joint that kind of is like a Hershey's Kiss kind of melted, you know, where it's not really that great. So yeah. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put a little bit on there, and I don't have a needle for this, but it'll be fine. We'll just that works that way, and then we will. Perfect. So one thing that we want to do with this, we want to hang this over the bench, and I want to show you how many obstacles in the way, like power cords and things like that, really important. But but in this situation, we're going to work with 400, I think it is. This one's set to, or it's 420. So yeah, we can actually use it at yeah, put it at 400. We'll do. Cool. So we want to just heat this one up from the bottom. And you want to hang off your bench a little bit with it. The heat itself is not too incredibly hot. If you're still within a foot of it, you won't really melt anything. Just make sure you're not too close, because this will destroy a lot of your table and things like that. So make sure you're hanging off the edge. So I actually have my silicone mat hanging off about 1 inch, and then I have the board hanging off a little bit farther as well. So once we heat this one up, you want to hold it about 1/2 inch or about 1/4 inch from the bottom of the actual board itself. Don't want to put it too close, because you're actually going to physically touch the components there. But this airflow is not going to knock any of those components off at all. I wonder if we need to increase the temperature. Yeah, we'll do it to 420. Okay, cool. So we increased the temperature to 420 because I noticed it wasn't really melting the flux as fast as I wanted. One thing that you can do as well is I always stick my finger out, and you can rest that underneath your bench. And that way it steadies your hand, because as you're looking through your scope, your hand is naturally going to start wandering, and you may bump on the bottom of the board itself. So kind of stick your finger out, and it'll get that, kind of your measurement in your mind with it. And we're completely under the board. The the nozzle itself is only sticking out a little bit. You can barely see it. Well, you probably can't even see in that view at all.
If you guys are interested and you guys want to kind of like move around to get a better view, by all means, feel free to walk until we can get a mic so you guys can hear properly.
And a lot of times you may say like, man, it's smoking up, it's doing all this stuff. That's totally normal. And there's a lot of flux on here, but what we're really looking for, we're looking for, let me see. All right, perfect. There's little anchors on the side that I can see inside of my scope. And I wonder if this one is just set at a different temperature. This should be melting. Put it at 450. So each station is a little bit different. You can calibrate them. So we're going to crank this one up to 450 just because I noticed that it's sitting here. It should have already been off by now. So we're holding it pretty close. I got my finger sticking out so I don't accidentally lift it up and touch the bottom of the board. But as we can see, these little, the little pins inside of there are starting to melt. And they'll start to turn really shiny. And as soon as they do that, we can lift it off and put the new one back on.
For you guys that are in the back that can't see, just to give a description visually about what's going on. So he's holding the hot air gun probably about anywhere between like an inch to an inch and a half. And you can see when he touches the port that it becomes to get loose.
Yeah.
Just visually perspective, he's about an inch or less away from the board up underneath.
And so even though I moved my hot air literally away for like 1 second, it solidified again because it dropped below that melting point. So now it's completely solid again, and I need to heat it up to recoup that temperature. So,
I have a question. Where do those small components come off of it? Like the black?
So how he's described in the manner and technique that he's using by heating air up under the board and the surface tension that's holding the components that may be near that maybe get liquefied, the solder may be liquefied. Because of the manner that he's, the technique that he's using, those components stay mounted on the surface, basically. Say that again?
The black fluids there, those four components there, if they get out of place, they move.
Yeah, she's referring to the one that's like...
yes, yeah. No, yeah, so those right there, I bumped them on purpose because I'm going to show you how to put them back in their spot pretty easily.
If they're not doing it correctly, how do you know?
He's about to explain it.
Yeah, so the cool thing with them is these right here are going to be, this is a capacitor right here, the little kind of ceramic, or this one right here is a capacitor. These here are diodes. Diodes do have a direction to them, but the capacitors don't. So the capacitors can be put on the board in whatever orientation you want. You can flip them around, and as long as one end is where it should be or flipped the other way, it's okay. On these boards, it's really cool. These actually have orientation dots. So this right here, this little copper area, this little copper area, and this little copper area are indicators on where the cathode goes for the diode itself. So the cathode is going to be the line side. If we can, let me see here.
She basically asked if any of the capacitors moved. What would you do?
I'm gonna see if I can just clean off the top of these really quick. All right, perfect. I think that's good. I'm sorry? Yeah, so you can use alcohol to safely clean the board. And that's what we'll do to like clean off all the flux and things like that. So we're gonna see if we can. I don't know if we can see those. Can y'all see in there? There's like one side that has a line going across it. Okay, cool. So these lines right here indicate the cathode side. So if one of them falls off, you can match that back up with the orientation that it should go. So those are pretty cool that way. Other things on the board, those are really the only ones that have directional. Well, there is ICs and stuff like that, which to kind of show you that this one here has that same thing there where we can, so this is the orientation dot here. And then the orientation dot on the IC is right there in the corner, if you can see that. So those kind of indicate which way those should go. Most everything else is pretty bi-directional, so you can just put it however you want. So cool. Any questions at this point? Cool. So in this situation, what we would do is, I'm not actually going to clean anything on the board as far as the solder goes. We're going to leave the solder exactly as it is, and I'm only going to clean off the flux, just because we've already talked for just a second, and it's kind of really thick. We'll see.
It's cleaning the flux that we use to when we remove the port.
Yeah. Let it sit on there for a second to kind of loosen it up, which they are very stuck. So I'll kind of show you the really cool thing with this, because kind of teaching it, you have to stop, but with the regular repair, I would actually not stop. So we'll just throw this out of here. All right, cool. So we can either fix the components now, or we can fix them whenever we put the HDMI back on. I would probably prefer, seeing that everything looks really great now. All my pads on here are all very uniform in size. They all have the same exact amount of solder on them for what it looks like. I'm gonna leave the solder there because it's totally fine. Also, all of the anchors here.
How can so let me ask you a question. How can you tell that they're all have the right amount of solder on them? Like what I use is I use the highlights on the solder contact points. So I'm analyzing the highlight points. The highlight points are like the red inset. So you can see the outer highlight point, and then you can see the inside white highlight point. So based on the size, dimension, and shape of that highlight point, that's what I use to indicate the amount of flux. And when those highlight points are basically coincide with each other and are symmetrical all the way across, then that's how I tell.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly what he said, because you look at the reflection and it will indicate the contour of the solder that's on there. And if you have basically if you don't have as much solder, you'll have a really, really big broad reflection. If you have a whole bunch of solder mounted up, you'll have just like a little strip on it. It'll be very narrow. So in this particular situation, we want to leave the solder on there. We want to leave the solder inside of the anchors as well. We don't want to try to remove it. I do have a method to remove it. Actually, a video on my YouTube channel, I show how to remove it, but I use a hot air with the soldering iron, but I found a more simplistic method, so I've done that now. But what we're gonna do, we're gonna place this one off to the side, and we're gonna prepare our HDMI port. And that's like the next, next big step for this here. So you can pick these up from Injured Gadgets. They're literally just a few dollars a piece. And so the repair is very profitable. This repair here would be $125. So like $5 into a port, you have $120 for profit. And they're incredibly simplistic to open up. Like they're literally like 4 screws on the back, like a couple screws inside. And they're so durable that like anybody can pull them apart.
If you guys are confident enough that you're already doing screen repairs, you can already assure yourself that that same confidence will get you through these console repairs. So as precise and technical and minute that some of the repairs can be within an iPhone device, just to reiterate myself, that confidence will get you through these same repairs. These boards, like you said in the beginning of the workshop, they're very durable. They will withstand a high amount of heat, a high amount of pressure, a lot of different variables will not affect them as they would within an iPhone. So if you're in that spectrum of not damaging your iPhone devices, you can be assured that you're already careful enough that with the proper understanding that we're trying to provide you now, that you should be able to get through these successfully.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And one thing, I don't own a PS4, I don't own an Xbox. I literally have never played since high school. So like, yeah, so the thing is like, if you don't know how to go through the menus, it's totally cool. Like the menu is like 2 buttons. And also fixing it is totally apart from knowing how to operate it. So very easy process. So let's see where we are at. Are we right in the middle there? Perfect. Yeah, this is like zoomed. All right, cool. So with this here, we want to prepare the port. Preparing the port is kind of the method to not having to worry about wicking the holes, and then also how to create nice little solder fillets on each of the little pins. If you've seen any kind of like charge ports being done and things like that, if you've noticed the little pin, when it goes down to the actual pad, you have like a nice flow of solder that kind of rolls down through there. That is what we're preparing to have happen with this process here. So what we want to do is we want to add, flux once again.
This technique is called tinning also as well, just to give you just a specific term around it. He's tinning these pins with a little bit of solder to help the surface mounting process.
And with any time you use your iron, just make sure you always clean it and make sure it's completely fresh and that it should take solder decently easy. And you have a nice little bubble on there, which will work fine for this. Really, any tip will work fine for all of these because we're not actually going to use the solder tip on the actual board itself. The iron is so small and the board is so big that you're not going to be able to get enough power from the iron to like properly flow the solder using your iron on the board. So my method with that is I'm saying, well, if I can't get it to happen there, I can get it to happen when the port is all by itself without a board attached. If I can get that to happen and I can flow it with my hot air, how about I just do one side of the repair off the board, other side of the repair on the board, and use the appropriate tool for each, and then it meshes together and then creates a full repair. So that's kind of this method here. So what we want to do is we want to run the, I may need to change it. No, that'd be fine. Yeah, so we want to add solder to this. As you can see, it's bridged every single one of them, which is no big deal. So we want to add a little bit of flux once again, because when you're working on the pins like this one here, the flux will burn so fast because as you can see, the flux is now on the bench versus sitting all over the board. So it just kind of falls off. So add a little more flux. And now what we want to do is we're just going to go through here. And yeah, y'all can kind of see that. I wonder if we can, let me change the tip out really quick. And then, so that tip is a small conical and it's not transferring the heat really how we want it to.
Getting audio?
Now we got oh, nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, the other one's too small. It's just not transferring enough heat. Let me see if it'll turn on. Yeah, it's in there. Okay, cool.
Do you use a hot tweezer?
No. No hot tweezers, no. So I'm going to tin this one up just because it's fresh. Just put it in a puddle of flux and then roll some solder all over it. And so now we have a nice little blob on there, which works really good. Perfect. So now if we go back through here, we should be able to flow this a little bit. Yeah, we can see it's just flowing so much better now. So what we want to do is we want to tin up this side here, and then also flip it over and make sure that top side is tinned as well.
Just the mic.
And then we're going to tin the very ends of these as well. And it's using really light motions with it, so I'm not really pushing hard at all. Also not spending a whole lot of time on the actual pins itself. This solder's really muddy. Let's see.
No.
And then now what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to add spikes onto the end of all of these little pins here.
Maybe Brad can.
So what the spikes do is right now we have like a lot of bridge solder, but that's fine because we're going to reduce the amount. But what we want to do, we want to try to add spikes of perfecto.
Yeah, you got mic stand by chance? I'll hold it. Yeah.
It may have feedback though, if you're sitting down like that. It may have.
Yeah, just removing some of the solder is pretty thick as far as the amount that's on there. So anytime we do that, we want to add just a little bit more flux on there.
I'm probably setting in people's way. Speed. All right. There we go. Now, can you hear me in the back there now? Excellent. Way back there. I'm just gonna hold this.
Okay, cool. Can everyone hear us a little better now? Woohoo, yeah. All right, cool. So, so the whole process with this is we want to reduce the amount of solder that's on there. And you want to add these little spikes on the end of it. The spikes can be pretty difficult to add, but after you get used to it, you'll be able to add these pretty easily. So we're gonna clean off our iron because we had a bunch of solder on there, and then now, just like that, we now have spikes realistically on every single one of them. The whole process for this is we're adding extra solder, to the whole board. That way it makes nice little fillets. And also if you can get a spike on the end of the pin, it means that not only is the top and the bottom tinned up, it means that that very tip is tinned as well, which will then allow the solder to roll down it and look really nice. You can take it a step further too if you would like. It's something that I've started to recently do. And I have to say, generally, you want to have as much flux on here as possible, but I mean, as we do now, but without a needle on the end of that, it's made it kind of difficult. So we're kind of, so we're just kind of stuck from that there. But what we'll do is we're going to add a little bit of solder to the sides of these little pins. And the way that we can do that is you can just heat it up and then just add a little bit of solder there. And then same goes for this other side here. And we're not adding a lot, we're just adding just a little bit to kind of just prep all of the surfaces. And so there we go. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Technically, once you put it back on the board, you'll be able to tell if it's too little just because it won't make contact. But I can tell you if you have any form of a spike on there at all, it's going to be enough. As long as you have the a little bit of solder on the board and then those little spikes, it'll totally be enough. Yeah. Dielectric. Yeah, this flux is. Yeah, if you use like plumber's flux or something like that, that will like eat the board away. So definitely don't go get flux out of the garage or from dad's house or whatever. But like, if you use this stuff, this is specifically made for board repair, and so you could technically leave it all over the board infinitely, and it wouldn't mess anything up other than just being a kind of a messy job. Good questions. So what we're going to do now is we want to put this one back on. And also we're going to fix those little components there too. One of the things to do is I've cleaned off the board decently. If you have a little bit larger Q-tips, you can clean it up a little bit more thoroughly. But this should be fine as it is right now. Also, you might want to wear gloves too, because you will get a little bit of flux all over your hands, and it's probably not too great to have on your hands. So what we'll do, here's our port. We're going to put our port into a nice little area because we're going to heat the board up and go through the same process again. So what we're doing, we have our hot air. This station is set to 120 flow, and it's set to 450 degrees temperature. And I wonder if we can actually increase that because it was a little bit higher earlier. So depending on your station, you may have to adjust it. But we're just going to heat this thing up from here And it's good to have like a pretty decently quick temperature that it'll melt your solder, but not so hot that it starts to bake and char the flux. But also you want it to be fast enough that you're not going to cause any kind of long-term like cooking of your flux either, because it'll wear it out and lose its effectiveness. So what I'm looking for in this particular thing here is I'm looking at the anchors on the sides, which are these little guys. And then all of these here. One thing that you'll kind of notice is, check this out, that first right one is kind of melting and they're all just kind of rolling across. A lot of the data lines will start to melt before the ground ones will, just because they're easier to heat up. It's kind of fun fact. Not really that it's too useful, but that's kind of why they do that. One thing to note with this here though is we have our, you can see that they're kind of melting now. They kind of dance around and they'll start to mix. It's probably not hot enough yet to put the port on there because the port is room temperature. What's going to happen is whenever I bring this port up to it, it's probably going to freeze the solder in those anchor holes and prevent it from dropping in there. Or it could be hot enough, but there's no real way to know until we just try after about a second or two. So we're going to go through here. I'm holding it, very carefully, and then we're just going to drop it on. And as you can see, it's kind of dropping in there decent, but it's still kind of stuck. Okay, cool. So there we go. Now it's going to drop down in there, and we're kind of positioned. But what we want to do is, as we're waiting for it to heat up even more, we can go ahead and just push our little diodes back in place. And surface tension will actually make them jump back into place if you have enough flux in there. So right now we're melted pretty good. One thing you can do is you can scrub it left to right a few times. It won't mix any of that solder. And then you can push it back and forth. And then you can push down on the back of the port right here. And then remove your hot air. And then you want to keep a little bit of pressure on there just to keep it connected and kind of press down a little bit. Because sometimes those little pins can be, I wonder if it's this mic here. They can kind of be bent or they can kind of be a little bit off as far as some are a little bit lower than the others. But if you put pressure on them, it'll allow all the pins to kind of adjust to the plane of the board itself. So right now we're still pretty molten. Even some of those little pins, I believe. But we're pretty safe to let it go now. We're just gonna leave it as it is. Yeah, I wonder. Okay, so right now we have the board completely soldered. This one only would need to be cleaned and it would be ready to go back to the customer. Of course, after proper inspection. One of the ways that you can inspect it is to turn the board onto its side like this. And let me make sure I can get down in there, and we'll zoom in and all right, cool. So as you can see there, every single one of these little pins has a nice little fillet on it. Can y'all see that? Flux will make it so it's a little bit hard to really see it. So once you clean it off, when the board's still kind of warm, you can just douse it with alcohol and use a Q-tip to kind of soak up all the little extra flux, and then use a toothbrush later on to clean it. But this one right here, other than just needing to be clean, this will be ready to give back to the customer. Everything looks absolutely perfect. And check out these the anchors as well. They look absolutely perfect, and I never even touched them with an iron. So that's like the bread and butter with this particular method, is we call it the spike method, and it's the hot swap method. So it's kind of like two methods in one. But that's like our bread and butter to creating a 4-minute like HDMI repair, where literally in my shop we'll have them pre-diagnosed, hard drives tested, everything points towards the HDMIs, and we'll just have a stack of them on our rack, and then I'll just go through them and knock them all out, and 5 of them will literally take me 20 minutes. If you have that process down. Does anyone have any questions as far as this goes? Oh yeah. Yeah, so if you have any of the bridge or any of the pins that are bridged, it could be that the pins themselves are kind of a little wonky. So if that happens, you want to make sure that if you check the port before you put it on to make sure that they're completely straight. However, if they do bridge, it's probably because there was a little bit of solder bridge there that you didn't see before you hot swapped it on. But in the case, I would heat it up again, remove it, re-spike them, and then drop it back on. And just repeat that process again.
So let's do a Q&A because we got to wrap up in 13 minutes.
What? We went over time?
Till 1:30. We can probably go like 5 or 10 over.
Okay, cool. But what questions do y'all have as far as this goes? Yeah, it's regular solder. Yeah, just
It's an Amtech brand. You can get it from our company, enginegadgets.com. I can speak with you if you need help with assistance with sourcing it. I can give you a little closer demonstration so you can kind of see visually like what company logo looks like and whatnot, so you can get an idea what you're looking for. Model number, or model, the serial product number on the actual plugs we're using. So we have a tiered startup kits. We have like 3 different ones. They start. Not a good pricing's not my forte.
I think they're $5.99, $11.99, and then
I think they start somewhere
$17.99.
about $600 and then go up to about $1,500.
Yeah, for HDMI, you could totally do it with the basic package if that's kind of what you're wanting to get into. I do recommend getting like the middle grade package. It has like really everything that you'll need, and you can kind of grow into it as well. But also picking up the smaller package too, it can kind of get you in a lower price point, get you profitable, and then you have a secondary station that, you know, once you purchase a second, then you have 2 nice setups in your store.
If budget makes the most sense for the first kit, then by all means, it's going to get you what you see here today. You can do those type of repairs. But like I've explained to some other people that have had some questions as well. But if you're in that realm of getting into it and you know your work pace, if it makes better sense to go ahead and get the larger kit, if you're stepping into that realm, you will be using all of the tools in the largest kit within a few months.
Yeah.
Have there been any electronic devices or techniques, like things that you stay away from?
Yes and no, but not no. I guess depends on all the skill level or how deep you want to get into it. But I mean, iPhones are like sandwich boards and things like that. They're definitely much more difficult. But the process is just as simple as doing this. You just have to be more precise. So yeah. But yeah, there's not a lot that I would turn down necessarily for difficulty reasons. Yeah. Yeah.
What is your high volume rate? Is it mostly ports?
For these, yeah, for game consoles, definitely ports, number one. Just do ton and ton.
Probably should repeat their questions because no one can hear back there.
Oh, no one can hear? Okay.
So his couple of questions, just on.
Is this that speaker?
So his questions were basically like, how? Tell me your question again so I can repeat both of them.
So the first question was,
yeah, maybe I can do this. My first question was geared towards understanding if there's any devices that are more difficult to solder than others. And he mentioned sandwich boards and iPhones maybe being a bit more difficult in terms of how precise you need to be, but not necessarily much more complicated than what was here. Then secondly, I asked what was the high volume work for this industry, and it sounded like ports were pretty. Ports on game consoles.
Yeah, on the game consoles, your highest volume repair will be the HDMI reports. And to understand the basics of soldering and building those skill set, you'll be able to mitigate the risk of what type of devices you want to accept in. So, like I said, you will have experience through doing the repairs. Once you begin starting the process, you will be able to tell based on your skill set what devices you want to take in and tackle those type of repairs. So doing proper research is key. Even if it's just a customer inquiring about a type of repair, any type of research you can do is going to kind of give you an idea about what you're getting yourself into, so you can make that type of decision for that customer whether you want to take in their device or not.
I thought I had
Those are pretty straightforward and definitely a really, I would say they probably fall in the same difficulty as these here.
Same. I would agree with that as well.
Yeah.
You're going to be using the same type of techniques. You're using your soldering iron. So if you're familiar with what he was doing when he was tinning the actual port, those type of motions and understanding the use of the soldering iron will get you through that same type of repair. You'll be removing the port and prepping it and surface mounting the flex in the same type of manner. applying flux, tinning the tip of your iron, and sweeping across the points in horizontal and vertical manners. That's going to kind of surface melt this flux.
Yeah.
So what would be better, solder paste or the wire solder?
The wire solder. Yeah, so you want to use paste for reballing and things like that. And you may see videos on like YouTube where they show using paste in like really weird situations. But it's kind of just like, it's kind of really risky, and it's kind of more bragging rights because it looks more risky. And so I wouldn't recommend it for a regular repair. But once you kind of nailed it, you can kind of play around with it and see. But I just definitely use wire for things like this, and then paste for reballing. Yeah.
What other tools do you use for diagnostics, like board view?
Yeah, so the other tools that you can use for diagnostics, as far as these, there's really not a lot of like no schematics or anything like that for them. But for iPhones, you can use the XW, and there's also schematics available for those. And then also there's other tools like an iPower Max, which is a battery simulator. You plug it into the battery, and it tells you how much it's consuming as if it was the battery, which is really nice to be able to see like the amperage draw, things like that. For these here, just the classic multimeter, in diode mode, you can figure out a whole bunch of issues as far as whether a line is reading high or reading low, and be able to track it down as far as where to go on it. But multimeter, definitely. And then, where it's available, you can use the software tools as well, like ZXW for like iPhones. And as far as the workflow and all that kind of stuff for these, for anyone that has the pamphlet, feel free to scan that QR code and connect with this. Anyone that does, I do have like a free gift that I want to send out to y'all to be like a diagnostic flowchart, kind of give you a little more info as far as the hot swap method goes. That way you can kind of see it, as far as like a module, how we teach it in our program. And, there's no charge, for that. Just got to contact us, and then we'll get that over to you guys. Yeah.
Excellent. So I want to take the last few minutes just to give you guys the last chance to ask any questions. Feel free to find us after the workshop. Grab us if we're not busy. We'd be glad to take a couple minutes to speak with you on a personal level. But if you do have more reservations about accomplishing this repair, reach out to Ben and his team with ProFixer, and they will help enroll you in their courses to help mitigate some of that concern. But I do appreciate you guys coming out today. I'm sorry for the technicalities. I appreciate your patience on working with us and understanding that. So if there is any other last questions, we can take them now for you guys.
We're better at soldering than using microphones.
But in other words, if that's it, guys, again, this is Brad with Gadget, and this has been with ProFixer, and we appreciate your time today, guys. Thank you.
Thank y'all.